There comes a moment in life when you realize something unsettling. You've been giving yourself away to everything and everyone. Every request, every message, every demand you answered. You became available in the deepest sense of the word. And yet, something inside you feels empty. Not because you gave too little, but because you gave too much. Carl Jung, one of the great minds of psychology, warned us of this paradox. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." When you are endlessly available, when you say yes to every distraction, every person, every obligation, it's not really you who is in control, it's something deeper. The unconscious, the hidden patterns of fear, guilt, and the desperate need to be needed. Ask yourself, how often do you give your time, your energy, your presence? Not because you truly want to, but because you are afraid of what will happen if you don't, afraid of being rejected, afraid of being left behind, afraid of being called selfish. This is not generosity. This is enslavement to the unconscious. And Jung's psychology shows us the way out, because here is the strange truth. The moment you stop being constantly available, everything changes. People begin to notice you. They start to respect you. Your value increases, not because you tried harder, but because you stepped back. Scarcity creates meaning. Distance creates magnetism. Boundaries create identity. But this is not just about playing games with others. It's not about manipulating people into liking you more. It is something far deeper. When you stop being available to everything, you are, in truth, beginning to be available to yourself, to your inner voice, to the unconscious that guides your life. And this shift from outward availability to inner presence is the very foundation of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. In this journey, we are going to explore Jung's psychology of availability and boundaries. We'll look at why saying no is not an act of cruelty, but an act of self-discovery. We'll see how relationships, careers, and even spiritual growth are transformed the moment we step back from constant giving. And we will discover why Jung believed that without boundaries, there can be no authentic self. So, if you have ever felt exhausted from giving too much, if you have ever wondered why people only value you when you disappear, if you have ever sensed that your life is being pulled in every direction but your own, stay with me, because this might be the moment when you realize your greatest power lies not in being everywhere, but in choosing where you will no longer be. Carl Jung believed that much of what we call life is really unconscious patterns acting themselves out. He warned us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Think about that for a moment. How many of your choices are truly yours? How many are simply habits, fears, and invisible scripts you didn't write? When you are always available, always saying yes, it often isn't conscious choice, it's the unconscious at work. It whispers, if you say no, you will lose them. It says, if you rest, you'll fall behind. It commands, be useful or you won't be loved. And so, without noticing, your availability becomes a mask, a performance of generosity that hides an inner emptiness. You become addicted to being needed because being needed feels like being alive. But Jung challenges us to see the truth. Availability without boundaries is not love. It's fear in disguise. It's the unconscious directing your story while you believe you're writing it. The moment you realize this, something begins to shift. Awareness cracks open the shell, and what was once an automatic response becomes a conscious decision. That is Jung's core idea, to live with awareness, not automation, to bring the hidden forces into the light. Because when you finally see the unconscious at work, you can stop calling it fate and start calling it freedom. Boundaries are often misunderstood. Most people imagine them as walls, cold, rigid, shutting others out. But Carl Jung saw boundaries in a very different light. To him, a boundary was not a wall, it was a mirror. Every time you say no, you are not pushing someone away. You are reflecting back to them who you truly are. Each no is a declaration. This is my energy. This is my time. This is my truth. Without those reflections, people don't really meet you. They meet only the version of you that constantly bends, the mask that always agrees. Think of scarcity. When something is everywhere at all times, it loses value. The human mind is wired this way. We chase what is rare, we respect what is protected, we long for what is not constantly available. Your availability follows the same rule. When you are endlessly present, endlessly giving, your presence becomes ordinary. But when you step back, when you choose carefully, your presence begins to carry weight. This is why Jung insisted that individuation, the process of becoming your true self, requires separation. Only by stepping back from the collective demands can you hear your own voice. Boundaries are not selfishness. They are the conditions for authenticity. Ask yourself, who are you when you stop explaining, stop justifying, stop trying to please? Who are you when you protect your silence as much as your words? That person is closer to the real you than the one who says yes out of fear. Boundaries reveal the truth. They strip away the illusion of availability. They remind both you and others that your time, your energy, your presence are sacred. It is one thing to talk about boundaries in theory, but it is another to see how they play out in real life. Take relationships. When you are always available to a partner, always saying yes, always adjusting, the dynamic begins to collapse. Why? Because mystery dies. Desire needs space to breathe. When you disappear for a while, when you hold your own ground, the other person begins to notice your absence. They feel the pull of your energy again, not because you begged for it, but because you created room for them to miss you. Now think about work. So many people believe that being constantly reachable, constantly responsive, is the path to success. But the truth is the opposite. The person who never rests, who never says no, ends up drained, resentful, and invisible. Meanwhile, the one who chooses carefully, who protects their focus, who values their time, becomes respected. Their voice carries more power because it is not scattered everywhere. And then there is family and friendships. We love them, yes. But love without boundaries turns into obligation. When you are the one who always sacrifices, resentment begins to build silently. By saying no sometimes, by choosing when and how to give, you protect the love itself. You ensure that when you do show up, it is out of truth, not guilt. Jung's point becomes clear. Boundaries are not about rejecting others. They are about choosing yourself so that what you give is real. Presence without limits dissolves into noise. Presence with boundaries transforms into power. Carl Jung did not see boundaries as merely practical. For him, they touch something spiritual, something archetypal. He spoke of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. And individuation always requires a step away from the crowd. Think of the archetype of the retreat. The prophet who goes into the desert, the monk who withdraws to the mountain, the artist who locks the door to create in silence. In every culture, the path to transformation begins with a boundary, a sacred separation. Why? Because when you are constantly available to the world, you are flooded with its noise. The voices of society, of family, of expectation. They drown out the quiet voice inside. But when you retreat, even for a short while, that inner voice begins to speak. And what it says can change the entire direction of your life. Jung believed that the unconscious speaks in symbols and dreams. To hear it, you need silence. To recognize it, you need space. Boundaries are not just psychological defenses. They are invitations to the soul. Imagine protecting your solitude as carefully as you protect your possessions. Imagine saying no, not to reject life, but to honor the deeper life within. This is what Jung pointed to, that individuation is not found in constant connection, but in chosen separation. When you step back from the world, you do not disappear. You return to it transformed, and the presence you bring back carries a weight that constant availability never could. What happens when we live without boundaries? At first, it may seem like a gift. People like you, they call on you. They praise you for always being there. But slowly the cost begins to show. The first consequence is exhaustion. Your body feels it. You wake up tired. You go to bed tired. And somewhere in between, you stop remembering what rest feels like. Because when you are endlessly available, your energy is endlessly drained. The second consequence is resentment. You smile on the outside, but deep down a quiet anger grows. You wonder, why do they always expect me to give? But the truth is, you trained them to expect it. You said yes when you wanted to say no, and each false yes planted a seed of bitterness. The third consequence is loss of respect. Strange, isn't it? You give more, and somehow people value you less. Why? Because in human psychology, what is always present becomes invisible. When you are everywhere, your presence carries no weight. But when you are rare, people lean in, they listen, they notice. The final consequence is loss of self. You look in the mirror and wonder who you really are. Are you the person who always adjusts, always bends, always pleases? Or is there another self, hidden, silenced, waiting to be discovered? This is the tragedy of a life without boundaries. Exhaustion, resentment, disrespect, and the slow fading of the true self, Jung's warning becomes clear. To live without boundaries is not to live at all. Something remarkable happens the moment you begin to set boundaries. At first it feels terrifying. You say no, and your heart races. You cancel and you feel guilty. You take space and you wonder if you'll be abandoned. But then, something shifts. The exhaustion that weighed on your body begins to lift. You wake with more energy because your time is no longer scattered everywhere. You start to notice silence, and in that silence a strange thing appears. Clarity. Resentment, too, begins to dissolve. Because when you only say yes to what feels true, your yes carries joy instead of bitterness. The anger that once brewed inside no longer needs to be there. It is replaced with authenticity. Respect follows. The very people who once took you for granted begin to notice your presence again. Your voice seems stronger. Your words seem heavier. Not because you changed your vocabulary, but because you changed your value. And value is born from scarcity. But the greatest transformation is the return of the self. For the first time, you meet yourself without the mask of constant availability. You hear your own voice. You trust your own rhythm. You begin to live by your own truth. This is the paradox. By saying no, you discover your most powerful yes. By stepping back, you finally step into yourself. And the life that unfolds is no longer driven by fear, but by freedom. Talking about boundaries is powerful, but living them day by day is where transformation actually happens. So how do you begin? Start with small rituals. In the morning, before you check messages, pause, place your hand on your chest and ask, "What do I need today?" That simple question interrupts the automatic urge to be available for everyone else. It reminds you that you have an inner world to tend before you step into the outer one. Practice the pause before yes. Whenever someone asks for your time, your energy, your attention, resist the reflex to answer instantly. Breathe. Count to 3. Ask yourself, do I want this? Or do I feel pressured? That pause is the seed of a true boundary. Create sacred spaces in your day. No phone, no demands, no noise. Even 10 minutes of undisturbed silence teaches your mind that your presence is not infinite. It teaches others too. When you honor your own time, people begin to honor it with you. End each evening with reflection. Write one moment where you respected your own boundary, and one moment where you betrayed it. Not to judge yourself, but to see yourself clearly, because awareness grows stronger each time you tell the truth. These daily practices are not grand gestures. They are quiet choices. Yet over time, they rewire your life. Each pause, each no, each moment of silence becomes a brick in the foundation of freedom. And slowly your life begins to feel less like a performance for others and more like a home for yourself. Every transformation meets resistance. The moment you begin to set boundaries, the world around you reacts. Some people will question you. Why are you acting different? Others may become frustrated. They were used to your constant yes, and your new no feels like rejection. But here is the truth. Their reaction is not proof that you are wrong. It is proof that your boundaries are working. When you change the rules of a game, the players who benefited from the old rules will complain. Expect guilt to rise. You may hear the voice in your own mind whispering, "You're selfish. You're disappointing people." But pause. Notice where that voice comes from. It is not your truth. It is the echo of conditioning, of years spent believing your value was in pleasing. Resistance from others is temporary, but the respect that grows both in them and in you is lasting. Boundaries are not the end of love, they are the beginning of real love. Because only when you protect your own soul can you truly give it freely to another. So when the backlash comes, remember, it is a signpost on the path. And beyond it waits the freedom you have been searching for. What does life feel like once boundaries are no longer something you practice occasionally, but something you embody? It feels like integration. It feels like wholeness. At first, boundaries are conscious effort. You pause, you breathe, you struggle to say no. You explain yourself, you feel guilty, you wonder if you are pushing people away. But over time, a shift takes place. The boundary is no longer something you do. It becomes who you are. You begin to notice it in the smallest details. Your voice no longer shakes when you decline an invitation. Your body no longer tenses when you need space. There is a calmness, a steadiness in how you move through the world, and that calmness radiates outward. Others can sense it. They may not name it, but they feel it. A grounded presence that cannot be manipulated, cannot be drained. This is integration, when your outer actions align with your inner truth. There is no gap between what you feel and what you express. No mask, no performance, no silent resentment behind the smile. You become whole because you are no longer divided against yourself. Wholeness does not mean isolation. It does not mean you live alone, cut off, unreachable. On the contrary, it means your connections are richer, deeper, cleaner, because every yes is real. Every presence is chosen. Every act of love is free, not forced. Carl Jung wrote that individuation is the path of becoming undivided, of bringing the unconscious and the conscious together. Boundaries are one of the most practical, tangible ways we live that truth. They are the line that keeps us from scattering. They are the rhythm that lets us hear our own music again. And when you live from that place of integration, you no longer fear being unavailable, because you finally know your value was never in being everywhere. It was in being authentically here. When we look back at Jung's insights, a pattern emerges. He was not simply telling us to say no more often. He was pointing to something much deeper, the connection between boundaries and the soul. Without boundaries, we become fragments. Pieces of ourselves scattered across obligations, drained by demands, defined by the expectations of others. We live half-lives, always present, yet never fully alive. We are exhausted, resentful, invisible to ourselves. Cheeses, we begin to gather ourselves back. Every pause becomes a piece of our strength. Every no becomes an affirmation of the self. And slowly the fragments unite into something whole. The mask falls away, and the true face begins to emerge. This journey is not quick. At first you will feel the sting of guilt, the discomfort of silence, the backlash of those who preferred your constant yeses. But if you remain steady, something extraordinary happens. The guilt fades, the silence turns to clarity, and the backlash becomes respect. Boundaries are not walls to keep the world out. They are doors, doors that you open and close with intention. Through them you decide what enters your life and what must remain outside. And in that act of choosing, you discover your freedom. Carl Jung's reminder is timeless. Individuation, the path of becoming whole, requires separation. To find yourself, you must be willing to step away. To know yourself, you must be willing to disappoint others. To love yourself, You must be willing to protect your own soul. And when you live from this place, you realize something simple yet powerful. You were never meant to be endlessly available. You were meant to be fully present, not everywhere, not for everyone, but here, now, whole. Roche sauvage doesn't speak to everyone, only to those who